I'll say this, and I don't, maybe that word eminent domain, every one of you may right now have your own thought about what that means to you. And I will just tell you, after practicing in 28 years, if you have just one single point of view on eminent domain, you're probably underinformed. We've got a great panel to get up here and talk about this. We've got growth in infrastructure, growth in oil and gas. We've got more people moving here. Eminent domain is just a reality that we have to deal with. But one of the things I want to tackle tonight is how do we make that better? And we really got to understand it to do it.
So one day you get a letter in the mail and you look at it and it's got some interesting documents in it. One of them is sort of a survey looking thing of your country, and it may or may not be accurate. And you read it and it talks about plans of a pipeline and, makes a claim that whoever these people are that mailed you the letter have the right to condemn. Well, that's pretty terrifying. So you probably wrestle with that emotionally for a while. Then one day you may be out driving through your country and you see a strange white pickup out on your place. And you wonder, who's that? I didn't let him in here. Well, you run out to see what's going on and you find somebody's surveying your property. Time passes and you get more letters in the mail. You get a visit from a landman. He gets friendly with you. If he makes too good of a deal with you, they run him off and send a different one. And finally, you end up with a final offer from this pipeline company. And if you object to any of it, if you object to the fact that it's going to route over your wife's grave, or it's going to run over your barn, or going to cut your property off where you can't water your cattle, if you object to anything they offered you, the very next thing you get is likely a paper threatening you with an injunction, and you end up eventually in a condemnation proceeding. And they take your property without you having any say-so or anybody having adjudicated whether that company has a right to do it. And you stay in court and you pend until they wear you out. In the 41 cases that were associated with this pipeline here in this region, the most recent and the final 2 cases finally settled in July of this year. So those landowners were held pending for nearly 3 years in court without being even a chance to be made whole. So that's what's really happening to these people when condemnation proceedings occur. So we can talk about the law, the legislature, but there's real people on the ground suffering real economic damage and harm. And that is a problem that we have to do something about. When we start to look at what does it take to obtain the power of eminent domain in Texas, it all starts with a simple letter. One man in an office somewhere says, I am going to operate a gas utility. He drafts a consent letter, spends a little money, files a permit application with the Railroad Commission of Texas, and he's pretty much done. And then at that point, he has obtained the power of eminent domain, the power to condemn private property. And that's just fundamentally not right. So we have learned that in spades along the way, that there really is very little recourse for a private property owner to intervene and obtain a fair outcome in that process. So what we would like to see going forward is a way to level the landscape, to at least provide some equitable solutions for private property owners, provide a mechanism to have someone claiming the power of eminent domain prove that they're entitled to it, that they are doing something that is in fact for the public good rather than for private profit, which does not exist today.
So we're just asking to be treated a little bit more fairly. There's 27 million people in Texas, so less than 1% of our population is stewarding 80% of our working lands, our open space. I view the Texas legislature more rural, urban than R&D or conservative or liberal. They may not all look at it that way, but our state is so urbanized. 85% of our population lives inside a city, in cities and suburbs. There's more state reps and senators in greater Houston than there is west of Interstate 35. That very small cadre of landowners are providing aquifer recharge, food, fiber, wildlife habitat, clean air. So we all collectively are benefiting off of their backs and their hard work. So we have to stand up for them. And that's why all this matters. So with an imbalanced system, eminent domain practices in current statute right now are absolutely assaulting property rights. We've got I believe we're standing in a place with a sleeping giant that are woefully unaware of what's going on here. We have a legislature that is reticent to act, particularly an urban legislature. They're not ill-willed people, but they have a completely different perspective and view on these matters. So it's incumbent that they understand this broader societal benefit and why private property rights matter in this issue.
The folks that are landowners out here are in trouble with regard to what they can do vis-a-vis pipelines. My concern, my focus, my reason for being here is not broad concerns about eminent domain. It's specific concerns about eminent domain, and that is the private companies' exercise of eminent domain so they can take your property to make profit. The governor, the railroad commission, whomever it is, they're passive. They get a sheet of paper by a pipeline company that says, we want to do this. We're a pipeline company. We're a gas utility. We do public good. And so therefore they just check the box and they say, okay, you got it. Go ahead. So that's the executive branch. The legislative branch is the one that has let the executive branch be in this passive position because they've passed laws in the past that says essentially, you, the executive branch, don't have to do anything. If a pipeline company says it wants to exercise the power of eminent domain, let them. Have them check the box, make sure they check that box at the Railroad Commission, but let them do it. And then the judicial branch. I've been involved in battles in both the state courts and the federal courts in the judicial branch. I tried going to federal court to stop this, and I lost. I lost at the appellate court. But I think that people need to remember that there is a federal constitution, and it says some things that give y'all some protections as private property owners with regard to other private property owners taking your property. And so the two places I look are the state legislature and the federal courts, and they're going to be difficult.
With respect to the Railroad Commission, which if you read the statutes that give them the law to regulate pipelines, you think they're going to be regulated. In the context of eminent domain, they are not. The most vivid example of this that I know of right now, 142 miles of pipeline laying a 100-foot wide strip across the most pristine portion of this state remaining, and it's not even being used. Nobody, anywhere, the Railroad Commission or the courts in this state can prevent that. It is a tragic, tragic event of 41 cases, 41 ranchers have lost the exclusive right to their property.
You know, we talk about eminent domain reform. People say, well, I don't like eminent domain. It doesn't tell you a lot. I want to get a little more granular. We're talking about changing this. Let's talk about what specifically the problem is. When I've had a landowner who's gone through this for the first time, they undergo a process and a conversion, and they get it cold. And I call it the back porch process. And a lot of people don't understand that if you have a project and there's 100 landowners, probably only 5 or 6 of them are even going to get sued. The rest of them have to endure this back porch negotiation back and forth with the landman. He said, you know, calling him, handing him an offer, a check, and an easement that probably doesn't protect him. That's where, at least in my view, a lot of this reform or game or change needs to take place. Commonly, it's suggested, well, landowners are complaining because they want more money. Well, it's your property, so you probably are entitled to more money, but this is a lot more complicated than that.
So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to navigate the political environment to create that equity for landowners. I personally think that one of the best ways we can do it is hold them to the same standard as the public condemnors, and that's with town hall meetings, public disclosure, more transparency, being able to strip back the veil of secrecy that private condemnors operate under, be able to exchange, comparable sales. Just allow landowners to know what their neighbors are getting paid and what's going on, what deals are going out there. Where's this pipeline going? There's too much secrecy, too much opaqueness in the issue right now. And I think stripping some of that away and creating some more transparency will solve quite a bit of that. Sunlight's always a good cure for corruption.
Why is it that a private company gets to come in and in secret go off and say, it's really important we take this, but then they go take your property? Why should they, any more than you say, hey, I really like that pipeline company's office, I think I'll go take that pipeline company's office, you know? A city doesn't get to take property in private. They have to have a city council hearing. They have to announce it. You at least know it's coming ahead of time. All the determinations have to be made public. They're accountable. If you don't like what they're doing, enough of you can get together and say, we're throwing you out of office. We got a new city council here or something. But you can't do that with a pipeline company. And my concern is about whether they have the right to take your property at all and what rules should attach.
What Pecos did, in my opinion, and I will say it public, was a fraud on the state of Texas. They obtained their permit not telling the Railroad Commission that a significant piece of their pipeline was going under the Rio Grande and was going to pop up on the other side, on the Mexican side. They claimed it was an intrastate pipeline from Waha to very near Presidio, the end of the line. Bam, the permit was granted. 2, maybe 3 months later, Pecos acquired an export permit from the FERC, which they are required to get in order to transport gas into Mexico. They didn't tell the Railroad Commission about that. They kept claiming, oh, we're just an intrastate. Baloney. Big baloney.
The system is a legal fiction. So as many of you are aware, the BBCA has worked at both the state and the federal level. We worked through due process. We had taken this to the federal appellate court, to the DC Circuit. And we exposed the legal fiction to the appellate court, presented, our evidence in this case. We unfortunately lost, which was no surprise to us, but we believed it was important to exercise that due process. But at the end of the day, what was claimed was the 1,080 feet of pipeline that crosses the Rio Grande into Mexico somehow stands alone and has utility as an isolated segment. If that's true, how would the gas get to that 1,080 foot jurisdictional segment? So the whole thing was built upon this legal fiction. Its mere existence is offensive in that context. It was a fraud from the get-go.
If we're given this extreme power of eminent domain to these private companies, that ought to be forthcoming, as well as basic property right protections. We've had members that come to us and who have actually had back and forth with their landmen, and they've ended up getting some of these protections that they asked for, but gave them a hard time after the fact and said, if you're going to give this to us at the end, why didn't you just put that forward up front? And they say that we're not supposed to until you ask. How big of an offense is that?
Last question I have for you all is, we're 4 months away from the legislative session. Knowing we're going into that environment, and those of you who know the Capitol very well, what do we need from people who are sitting in these chairs up here? When it starts in January, what do you do?
Kind of from my standpoint, where I see us is at the bottom of a mountain, or at least a really big hill. But at the same time, it is a climbable mountain. We can get there, and it's definitely going to take a lot of involvement, but particularly from those who have been impacted and from those who have a story to tell. That's really what we're trying to do with this public relations side of it. Use this platform of TexansForPropertyRights.com that we've created to help tell your stories. The written word is fine, but keep in mind we're dealing with the legislature, and they love tweets, and they love pictures, and they love
Mostly of themselves, right?
Very, very true. Yes, short videos. So if you could try and pull that in to part of your own individual advocacy. We want to be promoting that. We want to get clips from landowners all over.
You know, the first most basic way to get involved is to become informed. And the best way to become informed and kill a second bird with the stone by supporting those that are on the ground working is to join an advocacy-minded organization. BBCA, Texas Farm Bureau, Texas Wildlife Association, Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, but support one of those or all of those organizations with your membership. Those organizations can help you be informed. And then with that information, now you can reach out to your legislator. You've got a bill number, you've got bill language, you know what's good, you know what's bad. Finally, don't ever underestimate the value of your single voice.
Mr. Gibson, would you reaffirm that there is no gas flow in this line, that maybe the shareholders that backed off or things are backfiring, I pray? Yes, sir.
There is no gas flow transborder in the Trans-Pecos pipeline. 0 cubic feet of natural gas have flown transborder. The system has been pressurized. Many of you that live adjacent to it are well aware of that through blowdown events that have occurred for maintenance purposes. So it does have natural gas in it, and the system has flowed a few 100,000 cubic feet of natural gas to the Bayad Chile facility near Presidio, which is on the United States side of the border. But the system has yet to flow a single cubic foot of natural gas and export to Mexico.